still just want to remind you that Martien Kas is professor of behavioral neuroscience at the Groningen University. I'm improving slowly but surely. And he is also the PI of a very important European project, which is called PRISM, which is one of the first major projects that was launched to discover new dimensions and new biomarkers for transnosographical dimensions. And as you all know, he's also the president of ECNP. So I'm happy now. I'm not the only one having problems with this slide stuff. So thank you very much for showing that I'm not the only one.
There we are. So first of all, many thanks, Marion, for driving this really inspiring meeting. It's fantastic that you're doing this. We can practice over dinner, but it's in fact Groningen, so we can. I understand the difficulties, but that's what it is. It's a beautiful city in the north of the Netherlands, but I appreciate it's more problematic to pronounce. What I'm trying to do today is to give you a short insight on what we tried to establish at the New Frontiers meeting at the ECNP meeting in Nice about 2 months ago. Really, ECNP is, you probably all know the organization. It's a scientific organization, the largest scientific organization in Europe, really trying to address neuroscience applied research for better treatments for brain disorders. And every year we have a meeting, which is called the New Frontiers meeting, really trying to address the new areas of the field, the emerging areas that we think are important to address. And this year's topic was, after a very extensive discussion with the executive board, actually chosen, really with the notion that we think the current diagnostic framework is really kind of the anchor, is the driver of many of the processes that we have to deal with. It's the way that we address patients. It's the way that we communicate about these disorders. It's the way we test new treatments. It's the way we approve new treatments. It's the way that treatments are being reimbursed. So there is a lot around this diagnostic framework that's actually driving many, many areas in the field. And we felt that this topic is so important, knowing all the new biological findings that are upcoming, to see how we can maybe start refining this thinking. So as you all know, or may not know, the current classification methodologies for mental disorders are defined. They're based in books. We can read about it, and actually the DSM already was established in the 1950s. And the last version, the DSM-5, for example, was established in 2013, I believe. So already more than 10 years ago. And if we look at the book, it's basically diagnostic classification of mental disorders and brain disorders based on common signs and symptoms. And I just picked on the example of the diagnosis of depression, where you can clearly see that the way that this is being defined is that there has to be 5 or more of these symptoms during the same 2 weeks period. And at least one of those symptoms should either be depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So you can all read the 9 different symptoms that are there. And that's basically how currently these disorders are being defined. Now, of course, it provides a classification system with a uniform language to assess psychiatric and neurological patients across the globe. So it provides a global language, which is useful. It also provides a way to communicate with the patients and with other clinicians, and to request reimbursements, for example, from insurance companies. The ICD, for example, diagnoses are also used by public health authorities to compile and report mortality and morbidity statistics, including in the United States. And also these systems are actually used to establish diagnosis for research on mental disorders. And that's an issue, maybe, that we need to address. And I think Marion already alluded this clearly, because if you look at the treatment efficacy many studies, and this is a meta-analytic analytic evolution of recent meta-analysis. So this is a huge study making huge data sets, close to almost 4,000 randomized controlled trials in over more than 650,000 patients. If you look at the overall outcome of that analysis, actually the treatment efficacy is very low, both for psychotherapies and pharmacotherapies. And we think this has to do with some of the biology that may need to be addressed in more detail. For example, I took a few examples from the literature. We're learning a lot about these assessments. And if you look, for example, at the phenotypic heterogeneity in autism, that's the left picture. So within the diagnosis of autism, you look at one of the core features, which is social functioning. This is highly diverse, looking at subgroups of the patients. So this is a study in 7,000 autistic children showing very different social trajectories from the age to 3 up to 14. So there is a lot of phenotypic heterogeneity within these diagnoses, but also across. And the right panel is actually data from the BSNP consortium. And they look, for example, at EEG markers. And if you compare that, for example, across the 3 disorders that they looked at and the controls, they actually were not able to find an effect. But then when they actually looked at biotypes across these disorders, they were able to find very significant effects between subgroups using this biological information. So clearly we have to address the heterogeneity within and between diagnoses based on this biological information. There's also a very large study out there from the Psychiatric Genetic Consortium looking at genetic correlation across various disorders. And this is a paper published in 2019. They actually found 3 very major groups where there is highly genetic correlations between 8 different psychiatric disorders, indicating clearly that there is some biological overlap between these disorders. So maybe, and we published already something about this almost now 17 years ago, we already said, well, you know, if it's so difficult to find genetic contributions for a specific disorder, we may want to look in between at the intermediate behavioral domains, for example, that are affected across disorders to get a better understanding of the genetic and environmental impact on these disorders. Another issue is, of course, the translation from those symptom and sign descriptions to actually biological research. So if we want to translate the information from the DSM into biology, this is really hampering progress because the definitions, the insights of mechanisms tend to be different compared to the very strict biological diagnostic boundaries in these classification systems. So clearly, we need to understand better the biology and the biological variation and make use of that. So the challenges we face, and Marion already elaborated on several of those, there is clearly a lack of understanding of the underlying mechanisms of psychiatric and neurological disorders. What do we need to measure, how and when? And how do we actually bring then the right treatment to the right patient? And once we have all these measures in place, of course, we need to obtain regulatory approval for these innovative quantitative biological endpoints and treatments that go beyond the current diagnostic framework. So with this in mind, we put together a great steering committee, and the names are listed here, really people from industry, academia, regulators, organizations across the globe, and try to put down a program to address this need. And what we came up with, and this is the program outline, we basically identified 3 layers that we think need to be addressed. So session 1 was applying innovative technologies to measure the patient. Session 2 was about understanding the biology of the patient. And then subsequently, we need to translate this biological understanding into new approaches. I think we had 2 great opening lectures by Steve Hyman and Leanne Williams, showing actually how we should be progressing with this diagnostic framework. and showing some excellent examples where biology could actually inform treatment efficacy. Then we show these novel technologies, focusing mainly on digital phenotyping, which is an emerging area in the field, of course, and computational psychiatry. And then we had 5 different lectures actually showcasing already how biology could inform us about the patient and the patient variability. And then we had a great session where also people from industry showed already applying this knowledge to actually into their novel drug discovery programs, showing how this could actually leverage the new treatments for the future. Well, of course, we also had some meeting outcomes, and actually we're working on that right now. So we're currently working on a meeting summary report, where clearly it was indicated from the meeting that there is a high need for a biological-based framework to establish more precise diagnosis and treatment for mental disorders, to bring the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. And also following the event, the steering committee actually from the meeting came together and are mapping out now a roadmap initiative for global alignment to start implementing such a biological-based framework for mental disorders. And we hope that this roadmap initiative paper should become available this year, and we're working very hard to actually make that happen. So with that, I hope I give you a little bit of insight about the meeting and what's coming up next, and I hand over the floor to Andy.